I want to talk about what it actually feels like to love somebody who is avoidant. Because I think it's one of the most stressful situations to be in. It's one of the most painful relationship dynamics because there's a huge part of you that so badly wants the relationship to work and you want the other person to be on the same page as you. And it creates all sorts of confusing, conflicting feelings. Like on one side, you might feel resentful or angry, and on the other side, you're frustrated because you don't want to be resentful and angry. You want to be loving. And yet, when this person doesn't meet you in the middle, it's very, very difficult to just open up and be the loving version of you that you want to be. But at first, whenever you meet somebody who is avoidant, you might not even realize that they're avoidant because at the beginning, it tends to be magical, it tends to be more easy, they tend to be more free to open up. There doesn't seem to be many, if any, red flags. And that's why it's so, so confusing when suddenly something changes. And that's one of the things that becomes incredibly disappointing because it's like this constant like chase to get back to where you were before, to get back to the status quo of feeling chosen, feeling important, feeling like you're special, like you were in the beginning. And that is really disappointing and sad. And it feels incredibly stressful whenever once upon a time to this person, it felt like you were so special, so important. And they showed up in a way that made you feel maybe more loved than you ever have felt. And also, you were able to love in a way that maybe you never have. And when somebody shows you some kind of vulnerability and you see something in them, you see their kind of area of growth that may be necessary for them, and you want to be that person for them, you want to be that safety, you want to be the person who really shows them you can be with me, you can feel safe, we can change the past, we can transform this, we can grow together, especially if you're like emotionally aware and you have that desire to grow in a conscious relationship. That is such a burning desire for connection, and it creates this almost like desperation for this other person to get it. You've heard the stories of when people who are avoidant heal, or you've heard the stories of how an anxious and avoidant relationship transformed into a kind of deeper, more secure love than ever before, and you want that. And so when the other person isn't willing and doesn't want to have the conflict repair conversations, doesn't want to have the difficult conversations, doesn't want to acknowledge your needs or your feelings, it is so sad. And it creates this really big confusion, especially if you start sort of talking to your friends about it and they're like, oh God, just leave. Or they say things like that. And you think, I can't. I just can't. I can't. And now, because I can't, I feel this enormous shame. I feel such a huge amount of shame about not being able to leave. And that is another layer of huge distress in the body, because shame is such a survival mechanism that was created long ago in caveman times in order to keep us alive. And when our friends and our family start disapproving of the person that we've chosen, we start to feel like it's a reflection of us and our worth and what they might think of us, right? And it's really, that part is really, really stressful, which by the way is one of the reasons why I created the living room, so that you can talk about these things and not be rushed or judged. So if you'd like to join the living room where there's other people going through this, then you can find out all the information about that in the link below. But yeah, it is the longer the relationship goes on, the more you feel like you're investing in this person, and the more hope you have and the more energy you put into it, the more you lose yourself, because the more this person like feels like you're asking them to do something different from what they're willing to do right now, the more they kind of retreat, or the more annoyed they get, and the more frustrating it becomes, because you then aren't appearing to be the loving person that you want to be. You're being perceived in a way that is not you. You're being perceived as like a threat, or somebody who attacks or criticizes all the time, and that isn't you. You don't want to criticize this person, you want to love this person. And it's all in, anything you say to them is a way of trying to build the relationship to be closer, because you care, because you love them, but yet it's being perceived as you're annoying, or you're too sensitive or something, which is just so difficult, because it takes you way back to your childhood, where your needs and your feelings were sidelined somehow, and then that becomes like almost like all the trauma from your past comes up, and then that becomes really stressful too, and you start feeling like you're acting like a child, which essentially part of you is saying, hey, what about me? What about my feelings? What about my needs? It's like literally like a little boy or a little girl running up to their parent and saying, notice me, I'm important, aren't I? And then someone going, don't know, no, you're not actually, can we just go and have fun? Like that's kind of what it's like. It's so sad, and it's like it's so desperately sad for your inner child, who's like crying out to be seen and to matter and to be loved. And it's very difficult, because you're trying to say to this person, I love you, I want us to be closer, I care about you, I see your potential, but you're not being perceived like that. You're being perceived in a way, and that's one of the most difficult things to deal with, when you're perceived in a way that is not who you are. It's not you, and that is all coming from their perception of the world, their coping mechanisms, their you know the ways that they protect themselves from vulnerability and accountability. And that is just, it's like just fighting a losing battle all the time, and the more that you try, the harder it gets, and the more confusing it gets, and it gets really tangled up and confusing, because you start then, when you can't like leave, because that feels like, well, I've put all of this energy into this person, I'm not leaving, and this is my mission. It feels like, well, I can't leave, but I also can't fight this person on this, because it goes wrong. So you end up freezing. You end up going into shutdown, and you become smaller and smaller and smaller, and then you become less and less of yourself. And when you lose yourself, that is the lowest place you can be. And that's why it's so incredibly hard, because you start thinking, what is wrong with me? Like, why am I acting like this? Maybe they're right. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe this is me. Maybe I do need to sort myself out. Oh my God, maybe I need to like really work on like not being so triggered around them and stuff. And like it becomes like this overwhelming responsibility that feels so stressful. The idea of leaving them feels incredibly stressful too. So you feel really trapped. So part of you might be thinking like, I can't do this. Like, this is not right. This relationship doesn't make sense. It's not, this is like not healthy. And you might know that on some level, but yet leaving feels like such a defeat. It feels like you failed, which by the way, you haven't ever failed. This is all like such an important learning. And as you start to speak your truth, sometimes that creates more disconnection, which feels horrible again. And you can stay in that disconnection for years, years and years and years, hoping that it will change. And that feeling disconnected not only disconnects you from them, but it disconnects you from life, because your primary goal is to repair the relationship, and everything else falls off the wayside. And it's really overwhelming the deeper you go into it. And so the way out of this, when you start to sort of really pull your energy back, like you offer someone connection and they say no, and then you have to pull your energy back in order to protect yourself. And when you start to do that, you start to gain bits of yourself back. And over time, that becomes stronger and stronger, to the point where you start, resonating with people who understand you. And then you start to build the confidence in order to be really honest. And that becomes really sad. It's heartbreaking, because you never wanted to leave this person. You never wanted to like have this conflict or anything. And you wanted to love this person. And that's the heartbreaking thing, is that when you start thinking, I'm going to have to leave, like, even if I don't want to, that's when you start to really be in this horrible conflicted place. And eventually you have to choose yourself no matter what. And sometimes that heals the relationship, and sometimes it breaks it down. And the only way you'll ever know is if you risk it. But either way, you can't go on the way that it is. You have to be able to set boundaries, and setting boundaries is terrifying for the nervous system that hasn't lived that way in doing that. So I wanted to do this video to kind of help anyone feel seen in this experience. And if you need any help with this, let me know. You can message me on Instagram or via my website, and I'd love to see you in the living room, and I'll see you in the next video.